This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So Nigeria's main index has had a rather decent 4-week run, and today really was no different. Today's performance, in fact, does bring gains over the period to just over 8%. It's far, though, from turning positive for the year. There are also lingering questions about the FX policy the CBN will adopt this year as the country is facing a funding crisis on top of having to deal with COVID-19 and a crash in oil prices. Despite today's decline, South African equities are having their best month in over a decade. From late March, in fact, the oil share has done better than the MSCI EM index. But can that winning streak continue? We'll find out. Here's what's coming up tonight. Governments across the continent are challenged to be more transparent in their spending plans. A startup in Nigeria steps in to link financial donors and those in need. And we shall explore how a popular pastry chain in Egypt is managing to stay afloat despite this pandemic. Let's start, of course, with the one thing that's dominating headlines this time of the year, the pandemic. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his capacity as the chair of the African Union, held a virtual meeting with chairpersons of the AU regional economic communities. Now, that meeting provided the chairs with an update on the steps to be taken by the African Union to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela starts us off tonight.
The AU Chair Cyril Ramaphosa first commended the continent's leaders for their commitment in fighting COVID-19, but warned that on the African continent, the peak of infections will only hit later.
While the numbers of infections in Africa at this time is lower than elsewhere in the world, we expect that the peak of infections in Africa will definitely come later. And this is what the science is telling us. And this will be with devastating consequences.
The AU chair says this therefore calls for extraordinary measures to be implemented on this continent.
At this time, it is also vital that we intensify efforts to end all forms of violence, destabilization, and terrorism on our continent. If we are to be successful in overcoming the coronavirus pandemic, we need to work even harder to silence the guns and to ensure that they remain silent.
The AU has also undertaken various measures to contain the spread of the virus and to mitigate the economic fallout that will be caused by the virus.
Among other things, your bureau agreed to establish the AU COVID-19 Response Fund, a drive to raise additional funds for the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and intensify the lobbying from the international community for a comprehensive, robust economic stimulus package for Africa. To date, we have managed to raise $25 million for the response fund and an additional $36.5 million for the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Ramaphosa also announced that the AU regional economic communities have held meetings with various stakeholders to discuss robust economic stimulus packages to assist the continent. Ramaphosa acknowledged the pressing need for ventilators, health workers, and other medical supplies for the continent. He further appealed to world leaders to assist Africa in this regard. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then. So there's a lot of appeal for money, and as tens of billions of dollars is being mobilized to deal with the social and economic damage being inflicted by this pandemic across Africa, governments here are being urged to be fully transparent on how they raise, allocate, and spend that money in this crisis. This week, for example, Kenya's government has been under fire for spending nearly $400,000 leasing ambulances, another $57,000 buying airtime for about 500 staff members, and nearly $100,000 on tea and snacks. And this, remember, is all coming out of $10 million acquired from the World Bank. Here's where the story gets a little more interesting. In a supplementary budget proposal issued to legislators in the middle of April, Kenya's Finance Ministry proposed a reduction of over $115 million in the healthcare budget. And this, remember, was barely a month after the country reported its first case of COVID-19 and right in the middle of a global pandemic. So it's events like these that have renewed calls for full transparency on how governments raise, allocate and spend money in this crisis. Earlier on, I spoke to James Muraguri, CEO of the Institute of Public Finance here in Kenya. I started by asking him why Kenya's scores on budget transparency have stagnated for years.
More keenly, it's also based on the moments or the years that government misses to make the document publicly available. And when to indicate publicly available, it has to be available on the national government website and accessible to all for free. So there are instances when government has missed that window, and so that has affected the Kenyan score.
And that's when you talk about making this information available essentially for free, because I know a couple of years back, things like the economic survey, for instance, people used to be charged in order to actually get a copy of that, and you couldn't find that information online. Would that also essentially affect the open index as well?
Absolutely. It would, if we had an instance where the government, generates the budget documents themselves, prints hard copies and takes to Parliament, and then tells people to go to the government printer to buy their copy, then that document is not publicly available because the cost of producing that government is a result of taxes. So that it's a responsibility of government to make available the document to citizens.
Just to pick up on a question around transparency, it seems that the government is more open about providing information in the approval stage, in saying this is where we intend to spend money. But they're a lot less transparent when it comes to actually explaining of the approvals you gave us, this is what we spent, this is what went to plan, and this is what did not go to plan. Why is that? Why does that happen?
So that, from where we stand from an open budget point, is that's a point where political goodwill is still lacking, and that's the implementation stage of the budget process. Because clearly, from formulation, government involves people, approval, Parliament will involve people, but when it comes to implementation of the budget itself, the government misses that point. And of course, our Auditor General and clearly has stated over years that there is leakage of approximately 10% of our budget during implementation, and most of these leakages happen, because there is no adequate involvement. Public participation in Kenya is still a formulation and approval case. We are still yet to get it right in the implementation. Right.
One last question for you. When you challenge legislators and when you challenge Treasury about the lack of transparency, the lack of follow-through on agreed-to decisions, even on things like debt, for instance, because we know that there are elements of our debt roster whose terms are unclear, whose price of debt is unclear. The prospectus, for instance, for the last Eurobond were issued, that is still not public. When you put these questions to them, how do they explain that lack of transparency?
Everyone, at that particular point, everyone seems to avoid the question around transparency. When it comes, for example, to the procurement of our debt, we've consistently been very good in procuring, but very good at accounting and being transparent on the records. And at the Institute of Public Finance, we've been calling to Parliament to ask, Treasury to make these documents publicly available so that people can be aware of what exactly is the government committing to. We still feel there is, it's not whether it's a legal component that needs a legislative policy that needs to be brought into place, or it's a goodwill to implement the existing legislation so that we can have
But it
For example,
wouldn't really
documents.
be a legal issue because, I mean, Kenyan citizens have a right to access information that their government holds.
Absolutely.
After all, they pay for that information, right?
Absolutely. It's a question of goodwill, both executive and legislature goodwill. And then the documentation that's there because it's not made available. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle for citizens to access this information if still Parliament also cannot access the information itself. Because we also see sometimes Parliament struggling to get information or summoning probably a cabinet secretary and not showing up.
Now, Uganda has stepped up restrictions on trucks that are passing through its territory. It's limiting them to just having one driver, and it's banned them, in fact, from stopping over in hotels. All this is part of efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19. Now, on the Kenyan side of the border, there have been long queues, kilometers long, in fact, of trucks that are waiting to pass through immigration controls. Some truck drivers have said they've been waiting at the border for days. Uganda does sit on some of East Africa's busiest road cargo routes that funnel goods from ports in Kenya and Tanzania on the Indian Ocean further inland to countries in the Great Lakes region.
I am being tested to enter Uganda. This test being done by Uganda is important for someone to know their status. Even Kenya should start such a thing. I feel everyone should be tested not only at the border, but even on the highways.
It is taking too long, so slow. This is the third day since I got to the border. They should at least add more officers so the testing can be done faster.
Each sample is taken to the Uganda Virus Research Institute in Entebbe. This process takes about 24 hours, a minimum of 24 hours for the results to be back. But we allow these travelers to continue on their travel within the country, though the guidance is that they don't leave their trucks in order to minimize movement within the community.
On to some corporate headlines now. Visa and Safaricom have agreed to a deal that will essentially connect the Kenyan telecommunications operator's mobile financial services platform, M-Pesa, to Visa's global network of merchants and cardholders. Now, under the terms of this deal, which still requires regulatory approval, M-Pesa's 24 million users and 173,000 local merchants will be linked to Visa's 61 million merchants and its more than 3 billion cardholders around the world. Elsewhere, Nigerian funds are switching back to equities from fixed income securities, hoping for a stock market rebound later in the year. This comes after a coronavirus-induced rout in oil prices prompted foreign investors to sell off their holdings. The stock market has seen foreign funds take flight as the pandemic decimated Nigeria's main export, that's crude oil. The central bank has been compelled to slightly devalue the naira. The country's main equity index did fall to an 8-year low earlier in the month. Glencore has cut its 2020 capital expenditure and output targets to reflect the impact that this pandemic is having on its operations. While reporting first quarter data, the miner and trader said its spending for the year would fall by $1 to $1.5 billion from an original forecast of spending at about $5.5 billion. Government restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19 forced miners, including Glencore, to shut down some operations, while the industry as a whole also lowered spending pretty much for the rest of the year. And speaking of the commodity sector, Royal Dutch Shell has cut its dividend for the first time since World War II. The energy company is also retrenched in the face of an unprecedented drop in oil demand due to this pandemic. Now, starting in the first quarter, Shell will reduce its quarterly dividend to 16 US cents per share from 47 cents in the previous quarter. This dividend cut follows the firm's announcement of its plan's most extensive strategy yet to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up shortly. We'll explore a startup in Nigeria that's linking financial donors to those in need. And we'll also be exploring how the coronavirus pandemic is hurting South Africa's automobile sector.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic, as you'll see at several points throughout this hour, does continue to inflict enormous economic damage around the world. The International Trade Center, it's a joint agency of the United Nations and the WTO, which focuses on SMEs, says that global exports of leather products and footwear around the world fell by over 20% in March compared to a year earlier. Exports of seafood products and vehicles also fell by 11% and 8% respectively. But import demand has also fallen significantly in Africa, according to the ITC, with year-on-year declines of 20% and 26% respectively in the textiles and garment sectors. Of a bigger concern at the moment, however, is the fact that 24 countries worldwide have export restrictions of one kind or another on food products during this pandemic. And remember, just last week, the World Food Programme warned that the number of people at risk of starvation around the world would double to over 260 million. A few hours ago, I spoke to Dorothy Tembo. She's the acting executive director of the International Trade Center. I started by asking her how intra-African trade within the continent, has changed since COVID-19 landed on our shores.
We're seeing the demand side reducing. For instance, you have the textiles and footwear sectors showing a 23% decline on the export side, as we are seeing in the manufacturing sector a 14% decline. On the other side, on the import, we are seeing on the vehicle side approximately a 14% decline. What is it that's happening in Africa in particular? We have seen that Africa as well is one that is being negatively impacted. We have undertaken a business survey which shows 74% of the respondents actually coming back and saying they are being affected in a very heavy way. And this is something that we really have to pay attention to. Simulations that we have done is that just 2020 would see Africa losing export revenue of close to $1 billion if we go on at the pace we are going.
Indeed. The Secretary General of the CFTA Secretariat, Kelemene, he was on record earlier this week as saying that the CFTA that was supposed to be implemented from the 1st of July, that won't happen given the circumstances. What's your reaction to that?
I should say I had a bit of conversation with Secretary General some few weeks ago, and I must admit that in the conversation that I had with him, he was very, very keen to move forward with the implementation to the extent that he could, recognizing that these are really challenging times for everyone. So for them to have taken that decision, I believe there must be very good reasons that, they feel perhaps would not be so supportive to the process to ensure that they get to a point where the operationalization is taken. Even the logistics of trying to get to the negotiating table themselves, I think, could be challenging in the current circumstances because you have varying degrees of infrastructure being available to the different countries.
Right.
So the option I see, the regional integration efforts being applied in the context of COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS, and many others could be the route that the countries use to keep this momentum going, because it has to be there. Trade has to continue.
Right. Speaking of trade, though, African countries cannot afford to pull off the same kind of monetary and fiscal stimulus that we're seeing in the EU, for example, or in the United States, for that matter. So trade might be the one way that we can actually essentially make sure that economies and jobs are preserved as we get through this crisis. But given the fact that a lot of our economies tend to be very similar, right? Agriculture, for example, is a very big part of GDP. How big of a stimulus can we really get through trade and the CFTA post-COVID?
I think here perhaps, of course, the stimulus is an important element of what has to happen for Africa to push forward. And I think the efforts that are being made at present by the different entities or individuals that have also been identified to lead on behalf of Africa are critical to this process. But I think it has to do also with ensuring that Africa is already starting to better understand their situation and see how they can reposition themselves within the COVID period, but also looking towards the recovery. What exactly do I mean by that? Africa needs to better understand their production processes, better understand the products that can be produced, better understand where the diversification efforts have to be made, and indeed better understand the diversification of the markets. Because you can have as large a stimulus package as you can, but if you're not really well organized to make sure that you're positioning yourselves to take off when that opportunity is available, it will become extremely difficult for Africa to make that leap.
Let's move on to Nigeria there. The founder of a tech startup in that country, Ebuna Okubanjo, is stepping in to help after watching with dismay as his home city of Lagos entered a coronavirus containment lockdown. That lockdown essentially means that millions of Nigerians on the margins could be left starving with no income and no food on their tables. CGTN's Alexandra Majala tells us how this techpreneur is solving that problem.
Nigeria's Lagos state government banned commercial motorcycles from operating most routes in January 2020. This meant that Mary Adoye's husband became unemployed, leaving her to be the sole breadwinner. She was able to take care of her husband and 4 children from selling corn cereal and millet drinks. But when lockdowns were introduced in Lagos as a way of containing the coronavirus, her business was hit. After 2 weeks of staying home and not selling her goods, she was desperate. A neighbor came to the rescue and showed her how to register on Angels Among Us, a crowdfunding platform.
The day I collect the money, I received a lot. I use it and support my business, and I use it and bought the food. I say it's only God that sent the money. So me and my family, we start rejoice. So I use it and bought the food and support my business. When I sell, I use the money to buy food for my children.
Mary is one of the beneficiaries of a crop of tech companies using their platforms to bring together donors and those in need. Angels Among Us matches donors directly with recipients and has enabled more than $5,000 in donations. Meanwhile, a similar platform dubbed We're Together has raised more than $47,000 and distributed it to 1,739 recipients.
When the donor clicks that button, that donor gets names, right? They get names, they get identities, and they get stories, right? Those stories are actual real-life stories of the people who need help, right? They get to make a decision and say, I want to donate to this person. So we are not taking donations and we're not distributing as we see fit. We're letting the donors themselves come to the decision that this is the person I want to donate to.
Nigeria's closely watched tech sector have also put their skills to use to help their homeland weather the economic fallout of the new coronavirus. These sites are basically a do-it-yourself economic stimulus, helping facilitate those with cash from keeping people in need from tipping into desperation. Africa's informal sector accounts for more than 85% of employment across the continent and has been largely bypassed by limited support measures from cash-strapped governments. An African Union study warned that the pandemic puts some 20 million jobs at risk in Africa, with the continent's economies projected to shrink this year. While Nigeria said the lockdowns will begin to gradually ease beginning on May 4th, it is not clear who will be able to go back to work, and the economic impact will be lasting. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
On to South Africa now, and the COVID-19 pandemic has had a swift and pretty severe impact on the globally integrated car sector. Over 80% of the global economy is currently in some kind of lockdown. CGTN's Angelo Coppola picks up that story in Johannesburg.
The automotive cluster is an important industrial sector in South Africa, and its continuity is critical to the future industrial and economic landscape of the country. It employs nearly 500,000 people.
There's no denying the fact that automotive is the most value add of all industrial sectors that we have in our country, all inclusive roughly 7% of GDP.
As the industry waits for its customers to come back to the market, auto executives should be focusing on several key issues.
There's two crucial priorities right now. One is preservation of cash, and secondly, it's the most important, the well-being of the workforce. And I've seen in recent weeks, having conversations with many C-suite executives in the automotive sector, these are the two key priorities. And particularly as looking in the weeks ahead, as work starts to re-begin.
While industry players in South Africa may be raring to go, it's about demand and supply, especially to the UK, Europe and the USA.
This year forecast, I think realistically, it would not be surprising for somewhere between 20-25% fraction in sales in the automotive sector. That's domestically, not to mention internationally, where demand has really also fallen off a cliff in key impacted countries.
The auto sector will see retrenchments to meet that muted demand.
There'll be a search for new markets, albeit small ones, but it will by no means ever replace anywhere near the lost volumes of production. But I think a search for increased sales, albeit small, but they do add up, in the Africa region will be a key trend to watch.
As the country's economy starts to get back on track, it's important that the auto sector also gets back on track because it's one of the most important industry sectors in the country. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
We're fast approaching 18:30 GMT. It's time for another break. Here's what's coming up shortly. China is deploying greater quality control to ensure medical exports meet all required standards. And Shanghai has announced a 2-month shopping festival to boost consumption. But will the clients come? Well, we'll find out next.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's make a run through some of the stories making you headlines at this hour. The World Health Organization is concerned about the community spread of the new coronavirus in a significant number of West African countries. The WHO's head for Africa did not name the countries of concern. Senegal, with a population of nearly 16 million, has recorded 933 COVID-19 cases since the outbreak, with 9 deaths as of Thursday. The government has declared a state of emergency, closed schools and issued restrictions on gathering and travel, but the case count has continued to rise. In North Africa, Libya's eastern-based commander, General Khalifa Haftar, has announced that his forces will stop fighting over the month of Ramadan. However, reports just in to indicate that the UN-backed government of Tripoli has rejected that truce offer. Haftar's forces have been losing ground to the Tripoli government. Early in the week, Haftar declared himself leader of Libya by popular mandate. An outstanding issue on the division of states stands in the way of the dissolution of parliament in South Sudan. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD as it's more commonly known, has been urging South Sudan's President Salva Kiir to dissolve the country's parliament. And last week, in fact, it set a deadline for the 30th of April. IGAD also said that a new legislature needs to be in place within 10 days after the dissolution of the current parliament. The formation of a new legislature is among the tasks needed to implement the country's latest peace deal, which was set up in 2018. And finally, thousands in Centurion in South Africa lined up on Wednesday to receive food parcels. The country is currently under a coronavirus lockdown. Local businesses donated 8,000 food hampers to residents of Mwiplas. It's an informal settlement. Initiatives like this are looking to cushion the economic impact of the country's lockdown. South Africa currently has one of the highest numbers of confirmed cases on the continent. That's a run through your headlines. Now, the quality of medical supplies, and that includes test kits, masks, protective gear, is coming under greater and greater scrutiny as the world continues to fight COVID-19. Despite being praised for donations and international support, some Chinese companies are also being criticized for delivering below-par medical products. CGTN's Omar Khan sat down with the chairman and CEO of Wenham Medical. It's a global leader in the field, to figure out how quality standards can be improved.
The best quality in the world is Japan, of course. The Japan for the hospital products, for just the normal products, they require the higher and higher quality. The second is China.
It's a bold and confident statement. But for Wenham Medical, a leader in disposable wound care and surgical products based out of Shenzhen, it's something they can back up. Since 1991, the company has been working endlessly to ensure top-quality medical products that meet both domestic and international standards.
Start from SARS. We're also in this building. We produce many face masks to anti-SARS at that time. Period 2003, we are quite, seriously to control the quality, because we have so many experiences that the face mask quality is most important. So in this case, we protect the face masks, and our people, our workers, to check the quality piece by piece.
In the medical supplies industry, international standards are going to vary from country to country. These fine details are well understood by Lee and his business.
N95, because this mask very high requirement. In China, we always produce surgical face mask for BFE, should be BR 95 or 98. For Europe, it's normally 98. For US, for normally 99 or 98. Yeah. If below 95 or even lower, it cannot protect.
The company's dedication to ensuring strong quality control measures has allowed them to gain a strong reputation with regions and countries such as Europe and the United States. And with both of these places experiencing the harsh effects of COVID-19, Li is self-assured in delivering what's needed.
For example, we also have a very good contact with FDA, US FDA. We have a very good contact in Europe for EU, CE requirements, and also Europe, they have the sub-branch in China to control the quality or the certificates. We always have a very good relationship with them.
As for the companies that have come under fire for providing subpar products, Li believes both a lack of experience and profit-seeking have led to this unfortunate situation.
Some of the factories, they don't know the quality, and some of the factories, they just look after the money. So this is not really good for the China brand, for the China, reputation. Many new factories, come to this field to produce face masks, but they really not have so many knowledge like us to produce. So this is maybe one of the things. That's why the China government control very strict for the exports.
Having set a high benchmark, it's hoped more producers can aspire to such standards. And on the other hand, it seems that with the right due diligence, global partners can trust their counterparts, no matter where they come from. Omar Khan, CGTN, Shenzhen.
Beijing has lowered its coronavirus alert level, and civil aviation authorities over there are looking forward to a recovery in the air travel market.
The long pent-up travel demand may be unleashed during the extended 5-day Labor Day holiday, and the peak will be on Thursday and Friday. But travel demand is still at a low level, with flights on average only 70% full.
Now, speaking of Beijing, its most popular tourist site, the Forbidden City, is reopening this weekend after a prolonged period of closure. The Beijing Municipal Administration of Cultural Heritage says if you want to get in, you have to make a reservation, and group bookings will not be accepted.
The Palace Museum has just announced it will reopen on May 1st, allowing up to 5,000 visitors daily. It's in accordance with government regulations, which require museums to let the public know how they can make reservations and what their capacity is per day. Dining and social areas will be closed, so visitors who plan to spend the day at the museum should consider bringing their own food and drinks. In addition, museums will suspend the use of central air conditioning and ventilation duct system to ensure smooth ventilation of the building. Other protocols include temperature checks, requiring face masks and visitor registration. An official from the Beijing Municipal Administration of Cultural Heritage said cultural exchanges across the country and abroad, academic seminars and other work projects will be suspended. He added that the construction projects, such as exhibitions and productions, will be suspended inside the museum venue to ensure safety during the pandemic.
There are 3 guidelines. First, visitors will have to make reservations and the museums will operate at a 50% maximum daily capacity. Second, only part of the museum's facilities will be reopened. For example, some have cinemas which are not included in the list. And third, reservations will be divided into different time periods. Visitors can come either during the morning or the afternoon.
During the May Day holiday, museums in Beijing will also launch online activities like live streaming tours, pop quizzes, and much more for people to enjoy without leaving their homes. Shen Li, CGTN.
Now, the first half of the year is usually a favorite time for China's traditionally large weddings. But this pandemic obviously has put many of those plans on hold, and that has resulted in serious losses for the companies that provide everything needed for that special day. But as they say, love springs eternal, and apparently so do the hopes of wedding service providers. CGTN's Chen Tong filed this report.
Flowers and a romantic white bunting all over.
it could only be a complex for weddings. But the past few months, it hasn't been as busy as in previous years. In fact, it hasn't been busy at all. Designed to provide hundreds of weddings a month, the complex owned by wedding company Bride & Lizzie has gotten 3 outright cancellations, with all the remaining bookings delayed to the second half of the year.
一方面呢，我们是不能办。
We are not allowed to hold weddings and couples are not prepared to have weddings. Most customers who had booked for February, March or April have delayed. Schools are now reopening and that's a good sign for May. And couples that reserve for May weddings are not likely to cancel them easily because for a May date, you usually have to book 1.5 or 2 years in advance.
基本上提前1年半到2年。
The virus has cancelled many weddings so far this year. But in China, wedding is still on the must-to-do list for most couples when getting married, inviting dozens of your friends and relatives to witness your love stories. Of course, for the brides-to-be, it's still an important dream.
I'll definitely have a wedding. It shows my husband's love for me. We will have the full ceremony, and I will wear a wedding dress for the photos.
So the wedding companies have hardly lost their business for all time. But all the delays have created headaches and losses on the way to those big white cakes.
我一个4月份的客人，我延期到10月。
For example, one couple has scheduled to have their weddings in April, but now they're delaying to October. That's another golden time for weddings, and I could sell that date for good money. But now I have to give it to the April couple for the original price. We were completely shut down in March and April.
价格去把我黄金的档期占掉了。
This same dilemma has hit wedding companies all over. Jiang Jiaxue, who runs a hotel in Shanghai and is also the president of the Shanghai Wedding Trade Association, says that even weddings that are beginning to be held now are being reduced in scale from their original plans.
今年的最佳日子呢，基本上去年都定完了。
The best wedding days this year have already been booked, and some couples are now willing to have weddings on Wednesdays and Fridays. But the table numbers are down. In the past, couples would usually have 20 tables, but now they book for 15 tables or only 10. It's a big loss, but we hope to recover in the second half of the year.
什么都有，那么希望从其他地方下半年开始弥补。
There are more than 730,000 wedding-related firms in China, all looking forward to rekindling their romantic businesses in the second half of the year. That at least gives us all a few more months to get wedding gifts ready. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
On to South Korea now. It has not recorded any new cases of COVID-19 on Thursday for the first time in 2 months. The country has also eased restrictions ahead of a 6-day holiday. Here's CGTN's Jack Barton telling us how authorities are planning to handle COVID-19 during this period.
There should be some optimism, you would think, amongst officials, given that, as you just mentioned, the infection rate domestically, at least for the first time in 75 days, is 0. Though yesterday there were 4 reported cases of coronavirus from people who'd arrived from abroad. But yeah, officials still telling everyone to be very cautious. The aim, of course, had never been here to have a 0 figure. The government's been trying to keep everything open. It's been trying to avoid lockdowns, have most businesses running, try to have as less an impact on the economy as possible. And for the first quarter, we're told that it's only shrunk by about 1.4%, so that's bad. But it's quite incredible when you look at some other countries around the world. But nonetheless, you know, everybody's saying be very careful. The holiday begins today. It's the Buddhist birthday. Then on Friday we have May Day, and then on next Tuesday it's Children's Day. All big events here. A big 6-day holiday. 180,000 people roughly have booked trips to Jeju Island, so Gimpo Airport is going to be bustling again. So great weather here. A lot of people rushing back to normal life. The government has stepped down a lot of the measures that have been in place, like the emergency units in front of hospital, but they haven't been completely packed away. They're still all on standby with the medical staff. I think the way you can kind of sum this up as we head towards this, what they call everyday quarantine beginning on May 5, when even the schools may go back, is the government is really hoping for the best, as are all the people here, but absolutely preparing still for a worst case scenario and a second wave that is very much still expected here.
Shanghai, in the meantime, has announced a 2-month shopping festival that starts on the 5th of May. Electric cars and hybrids are expected to be a major focus there. Now, the aim of the sales gala is to boost the city's consumption, essentially getting back to pre-COVID-19 levels. And a variety of electric vehicle brands have announced plans to offer some discounts. The objective, however, is far beyond just boosting auto sales, because remember, the car industry is a major pillar of China's economy. CGTN's Chen Tong explores that on What's Hot tonight.
This auto showroom in Shanghai's Pudong district will be offering a variety of promotions in May as part of the city's Double 5 shopping festival to boost consumption set back by COVID-19. Most of the promotions will be aimed at selling new energy cars.
We have 2-year free interest rates for auto loans. New customers introduced by old customers will enjoy subsidies. We'll also have gift bags for buyers. We've never done this before. All of it aims to boost NEV sales during the shopping festival.
Even TV shopping sites are promoting new energy cars. Just last month, Shanghai Oriental Home Shopping opened a brand new program geared entirely to promoting new energy car sales, and the results have been pretty good. More than 10 million yuan in sales so far. The program itself is publicizing an EV sales subsidies, focusing on a key selling point: saving money.
Our data show that consumers are more willing to buy NEVs in recent years because they're more convenient and they can save more money.
Just last week, China announced the extension of the national subsidy plan for new energy cars until 2022. All this publicity and all the subsidies appear to be working.
We can expect the new energy car sales will have a slight bounce back in the following month. In this case, the extension of subsidy is definitely going to give the NEV market the momentum to grow. At the same time, the government is introducing other policies to stimulate the demand for cars.
Mintel says that 60% of the consumers planning to buy NEVs will probably do it in the near future, a big boost for an industry that has been lagging. More importantly, the auto industry plays an important part in the country's economic development. In 2019, China's auto output accounted for 8% of the country's GDP. Supporting the auto industry means supporting the economy.
Auto industry has been known as the crown of the modern industry because it connects thousands of downstream and upstream industries, including steel, machinery, rubber, glass, electronics, textile, insurance, finance, sales, maintenance, gas, and logistics, not to mention the employed population that is related to this industry. Therefore, resuming the production of auto industry and stimulating the sales of cars can actually restore the resilience and energy of our national economy.
Shanghai's auto sale promotion will end at the end of June. In addition to Shanghai, dozens of other cities nationwide like Hangzhou and Shenzhen are also launching promotion plans to boost car sales and reactivate the economy. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices for you. So the rally in gold prices has lost steam, it seems, in the second half of April. But this is still its best month yet so far this year. Spot prices were up 7% in the month of April. Compare that to January's 4.7% gain and the declines that followed in February and March. Coffee, on the other hand, having another dismal month. C futures falling by over 11% in April. Not as bad as January's fall, but nonetheless, coffee futures are over 20% lower so far in the year. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how a popular pastry chain in Egypt is staying afloat despite this pandemic.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, there has been an increase in demand for courier services in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, ever since COVID-19 landed in the East African nation. Operated by a myriad of tech startups, the businesses are now classified as essential services. And they really are, because they deliver just about everything from food to much-needed medicine and medical supplies. As CGTN's Robert Nagila now reports, one tech firm in particular, Glovo, is the latest entrant to shake up the market.
They are the unsung heroes of the COVID-19 crisis, ensuring the city never goes without supplies. Justin Paul is one of several hundred independent couriers partnering with on-demand courier service Glovo that buys, picks up and delivers products ordered through their mobile app.
We are trying as much as we can to provide this service while protecting ourselves and wherever customer we are delivering to.
Movement and physical distancing restrictions imposed by the government to control the spread of COVID-19 has seen a surge in demand for on-demand courier services as many Kenyans heed the government's call to stay home.
We are able to deliver during the curfew, but many restaurants are shut, which of course means there's a reduction of demand. This is counterbalanced by an increase in demand in groceries. We've seen around a 3 times increase in grocery orders over this period.
Glovo, a Spanish startup founded in Barcelona with a presence in Italy, has been in Kenya for just over a year. Experience of the pandemic in both European countries helped them get an early sense of the impact on their business quicker than their rivals.
There have been a number of changes that we've implemented to make sure that people are being kept safe. This ranges from contactless delivery, so products are picked up from the stores without any human interaction with the storekeepers or the restaurants. They're delivered by riders who have safety kits, and then they can be dropped off at a consumer's door without the consumer having to open the door and without any cash having to be exchanged.
That's because payments are made through mobile money apps to avoid the risk of spreading the virus through the use of cash. In 2019, the number of private courier firms in Kenya grew to over 1,000, with sector deliveries up 22% compared to the previous year. Other tech startups providing on-demand delivery services include Jumia and Sendi. Despite Glovo's success, they're not immune to the disruption in the financial markets caused by the pandemic. Increasing costs have meant they're yet to turn a profit.
The financial markets are obviously looking very uncertain, and we're now having to really be very careful and conserve our cash position to make sure that we can continue operating and turn a profit and if necessary not raise another round of funding.
In the meantime, the company says they'll continue to deliver on what they do best, on-demand courier service. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And our last story for the hour, the coronavirus pandemic has resulted in many businesses in Egypt cutting costs drastically and trying to conserve cash. But 2 young entrepreneurs with a chain of pastry shops are now finding new ways of staying afloat while preserving salaries and jobs. And that's despite having to shut down all their branches amidst the country's lockdown. Here's CGTN's Adela El-Marouki with more.
This Egyptian brand is known for its mouth-watering desserts. In recent years, it's been among the fastest growing chains industry. until COVID-19 has hit.
2019 ended fantastically, and we had started the year as well very solid, great. We had fantastic projections. Beginning of March, thankfully, we still had the growth. We have a regular around 37% growth. We saw that growth decline in March to 9%. And then suddenly people started to be aware in Egypt of the whole coronavirus, that our sales went down, like from at least the growth of 8%, it went down 70%. And then we had for the security of our employees, we closed down.
This chain began with one cupcake shop in 2010. Today, Adil and his sister manage 28 outlets. This branch is the latest addition to the Nola family. It had only operated for a few days, and then a poster on its door said they had closed until further notice. The government had shut shops on weekends and imposed a night curfew. But the owners decided to keep all the jobs and salaries for their staff, despite the vague future the pandemic provided.
At Nola, we were partners, we support each other, we're a family, all of us, and we're in this together. So at least, it's something out of all of our hands, and from our side, we're trying to be. We want to support our employees as much as we can.
With 350 employees working for them, it's been a huge financial commitment for the young entrepreneurs. Luckily for them, the government has lifted many of its COVID-19 commercial restrictions right before the month of Ramadan began.
Ramadan is the most important month for our business. Basically, it's an additional quarter to our sales. We basically work our year around how we're going to maximize our sales, how we're going to enhance the operations, how we're going to develop new products.
To cope with the lockdown, they've approached supermarkets to display their products there. Still, they had to prepare more creative market entry strategies to survive through the pandemic.
We're working on products that we could place in the supermarket, like ready-made cake mixes, and you have a pan, like a cupcake pan, and you place them, you can bake them yourself. So this is how we're starting to think, because what happens if now after Ramadan they go back to the same measures we started off with.
The night curfew has cost them 20% of their Ramadan sales, which is not bad at all given the circumstances. At least they're now prepared with a plan B if Egypt needs to take harsher measures against COVID-19. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
A run through the currencies as we wrap up the hour. Kenya's currency continues to weaken at a relatively rapid pace against the American dollar. In fact, it's now ceded 6% to the greenback so far this year. The bulk of that happened from mid-March. At today's close of about 107.3, this is the weakest it has been since at least 2007. At least as far as the final day close is concerned. We've had some higher intraday numbers, but this is the worst close we've had since 2007. Inflation data for April also came out today. There was a steep jump in prices of some food items. The food index actually did go up by 12%. Headline inflation on an annual basis settled at 5.6% for the month of March. So then, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The news continues on CGTN.